After a year of Natlan, Nod Krai's character designs feel like a return to Genshin. While many people loved the Natlan cast, most would admit that when put into context, there's something about their designs which makes them feel a little out of place, in a way which even characters like Skirk or the Shades do not. Nod Krai provides a sharp contrast. The new characters not only look fantastic and full of personality and intrigue, but they just feel like Genshin characters, even though they do have an eclectic mix of styles. But what makes a design feel like it comes from Genshin in the first place? What makes others feel like they don't? And why does it matter? Where did Natlan's designs diverge? And why does just a glimpse of Nod Krai make so many of us so excited? Characters are the most important part of a gacha game, and a shared design language for their appearance is an essential foundation upon which everything else rests. A design language is a system of visual elements and guidelines which are used to create a consistent and cohesive experience. Even if you've never heard of the concept before, you'll have encountered countless in your life. Tech companies have created famous and rigorously regimented examples, such as Google's material design, but while others are not so explicitly defined, they are no less iconic. When you watch an animated movie, you can instantly tell the difference between a cartoon saloon film or a Studio Ghibli one, even though both studios create absolutely stunning 2D animation. The shapes, the colors, the textures, the movement, all of these things instantly make it obvious which is which. That consistency makes things fit together. When it comes to video game characters, the biggest benefit of a clear design language is that it makes everyone in the game feel like they belong. It's the kind of thing we feel on an instinctive level, which can be hard to even put into words if you don't know what you're looking for, and where each specific aspect can seem obvious when pointed out in isolation. And one important thing to remember is that this is not a value judgment. A character who does fit the language can have a design you actively dislike, while one which doesn't fit can have a gorgeous appearance. If a character which I feel sticks out feels like a cohesive part of the world to you, that's fine too. It's subjective, and the different parts of any design language might feel more or less significant to each individual. I studied art and design at college, almost specialized in fashion before picking graphic design, and then spent years creating clothes and hairstyles for The Sims 4, so this kind of thing always really stands out to me. To some people, it just won't matter as much. Either way, when done right, it all comes together to make the entire experience feel so much more immersive. When it comes to Genshin, there are a few different layers to this. First, the higher level themes. The setting as a whole is a blend of high fantasy and steampunk elements, with occasional magitech science fantasy thrown in. Each region takes inspiration from different real-world aesthetics and adds its own unique flavor on top of the fantasy, steampunk, and magitech vibes which are common throughout Teyvat. Many regions even include a couple of divergent takes on their theme, applying slightly different dialects of their design language to different factions, which make each one feel visually distinct without straying too far from what you'd expect from that region in general. It could take an entire series of videos to talk through all the nuances to Genshin's world design philosophy, so let's focus on the characters here. Each individual character's design can land anywhere within the diverse space between pure fantasy and pure steampunk. There's tons of scope for creativity within those borders. Each region's characters tend to inhabit a similar region of that space, so they all feel closely related, and they usually embody a specific trope or character ideal which matches their personality and their place in the world. The themes of the world at large and each nation in specific are expressed through the design of the characters, and as a result, from a conceptual perspective, they usually feel cohesive. Second, the signature visuals. Obviously, a large part of a visual style is dictated by the aesthetics provided by the game engine and how they've configured it, and there are some other traits inherent in the anime aesthetic that inspired the game's style, such as the approach to face design, the flamboyant hair with bright pastel colors, and so on. But there are other consistent details which Hoyo have clearly decided to stick to on their own. Genshin characters' clothes tend to be built up in lots of layers. Instead of having single garments, they usually have multiple smaller pieces of clothing which are overlapped on top of each other to create the overall effect. Detached sleeves, for example, are very common, as are multi-layered capes or other long strips of fabric. To me at least, this has always felt like a very distinctive stylistic choice, and it greatly contributes to whether any given character feels like they fit the world. They also often have extensive ornamentation, lots of tassels, metallic embellishments, or other special objects or trinkets unique to each character. Clothes often have bold color choices or beautiful printed fabric. Hair tends to be pastel colored, again with multiple layers and flashy ornamentation, and it's often split in two in some way. And of course, there's a very strong trend of balanced asymmetry, where the different elements of the outfit are asymmetrical, but their distribution provides an overall sense of balance in spite of their lack of symmetry. And third, the movement and expression. Genshin's character movements strike a balance between realism and idealism. Most characters are graceful, and the fluidity of every movement is emphasized by the flowing layers of fabric. They are rarely exaggerated or cartoonish. The animation avoids the approach common to much anime, where the characters are transformed into chibi form whenever they express emotion, and instead their expressions are restrained and as close to realism as possible given their stylized faces. Each character's combat animations are unique, and they further express their personality through the way they move. Oyo have always been a little more flexible here. While most animation in the game respects continuity, in combat they aim to make it look and feel good above all else, so it's pretty common to see characters switching stances in a single frame to ensure the animation feels snappy and responsive. It's always been interesting to me that even characters where you are not intended to ever use their normal attacks have beautifully crafted attack animations, and the detailed recovery animations in particular have always been a highlight, especially because they strongly evoke their personality. There are, of course, occasionally one or two characters in each region which buck the trend set by the others from that area. Since they're fairly rare, these outliers feel almost like an accent color, a clashing hue which adds a little contrast to the overall picture, serving to highlight the uniformity of the rest by way of comparison. But though they stand out from the others from their region somehow, they tend to follow the more general visual language in their own way, and so they still feel like they belong, even though they stand out. Genshin's design language is the reason the game can feel so cohesive while including so much variety. The moment you look at a character, you know whether they belong into that, and it's often obvious which region they're from, even from a glance. And when someone stands out, there's often a reason for it. That was all pretty theoretical, so let's look at some of the specifics for each nation, leading up to why Natlan feels out of place to many. Mondstadt embodies that most stereotypical of fantasy aesthetics, medieval Europe. In some ways, it feels a little more generic than the other regions, but that could just be because of how familiar the medieval fantasy setting has always been. The Knights of Favonius are a perfect example of a more specific design language used for a smaller set of characters. They're very cohesive as a group, with a military vibe and a consistent color scheme, despite each one having unique takes on the shared appearance. Mondstadt also has mages, religious figures, and other fantasy stereotypes like a bard or a wild child raised by wolves, all of whom feel part of the same world. Some, like Mona or Fischl, do feel a little more out there than the others, each for their own reasons, but on the whole, it all fits together. Liyue, of course, is a fantasy interpretation of Chinese culture, and it's here Genshin's character design language feels at its strongest. The clothing often has even longer strips of dangling fabric, and there are consistent design details like that quintessentially Mandarin collar shape. Hairpins and other classic jewellery are another theme, as are clasps for fastenings, and strings and tassels are ever present. Those last are often bright red, which is clearly inspired by the cultural significance of that colour. The outfits as a whole tend to have a strong contrasting colour combination, and there's a lot of those geometric patterns or other detailed prints across large swaths of fabric. While there are a couple of outlier characters who do bring in some extra influences, overall, Liyue is remarkably cohesive. Inazuma takes the high fantasy emphasis over to Japan. Many characters wear clothes which are clearly inspired by kimonos or yukatas, often with their overlong sleeves as one of the most prominent dangling layers. Several characters have oversized bows on their back, while many have some martial ornamentation, armor, which reflects the warlike state of their nation. The fabric tends to have some areas with bold patterns and prints, with areas of simple plain color. Many characters wear sandals, Kujusaras being the most pronounced. While many of the characters here fit that martial aesthetic, a handful do stand out. Ito and Kuki feel like they're inspired by the darker part of that world, and fit the region very well despite their slightly different aesthetic, while Kokomi looks like a mermaid princess and feels a little out of place when stood next to her compatriots. Sumeru, meanwhile, is a fusion of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and North African cultural influences, and leans heavily towards fantasy with a sprinkling of magitech. Their clothing tends to be in bold, highly contrasting colors, with either no print at all or just some subtle geometric flowers. The fabric looks noticeably lighter and more flowy than in other regions, which fits perfectly with the climate and cultural references of the region. While the fabric itself is less detailed, the designs still have just as much intricacy as any other region. Instead, the details are cast in gold and silver embellishments woven throughout their designs, which add an eye-catching metallic shine. Another interesting common thread is that Sumeru characters often have either a belt or a waist scarf from which the majority of their random objects or other strips of fabrics hang. Sumeru has at least 2 distinct subcultures which are emphasized in their characters' designs, the scholars of the city and the warriors of the desert, both of which are instantly recognizable. And Sumeru's most out-of-place character is actually my favorite example. Faruzan's style doesn't quite fit with the rest, and it makes so much sense. She's from 100 years in the past and hasn't changed her sense of fashion, so the reason she stands out is that she's literally out of place. A perfect example of storytelling through design. Next, Fontaine, which has a Victorian-era theme and brings Tevat's steampunk streak front and center for the first time. This is easily my favorite region from a design perspective. There are ruffles everywhere, lace, bows, corsets, ball gowns, layered fabrics, fancy hats, and intricate accessories, with that occasional metallic sheen for the steampunk style touches. Victorian-era style combines so well with steampunk that even though there's a diverse range from Fremine's clockwork diver aesthetic to Furina's courtly style, every single character here feels perfectly at home together, with the possible exception of Siegewin, who is very Alice in Wonderland, and Escoffier, who is unfortunately just an ugly mess. Sorry, coffee fans. When looked at through this lens, it becomes pretty clear why so many of us felt that Natlan's characters were not only out of place in Tevat, but also discordant as a group amongst themselves. When it comes to the higher level themes of high fantasy mixed with steampunk and a dash of magitech, there's very little about them which expresses those ideas from an aesthetic perspective. Instead, the only real common thread is that they feel a lot more modern. I had been really excited by the prospect of seeing Genshin fused with the beautiful aesthetics of those diverse cultures which informed the style of each of Natlan's tribes, but was left disappointed. And worse, not only was that thematic depth no longer there, they took a big step away from the visual styles as well. The tropes from the rest of the game were often missing from most of the character designs, and while most did include at least one of these tropes, each of them used a different one to the others, so even there they lost all cohesion. And even more, they changed their mind on animation and introduced more cartoonish and exaggerated tropes as well, both in terms of facial expressions and in terms of movement. Morlani looks like she could fit in the world with all her dangling fabric and light pastel colors until you see her very cartoonish attack animations, her exaggerated expressions, and her bizarre pufferfish swimsuit idols. Auroron's clothes have layers, but he literally wears ripped jeans and a hoodie. Chaska echoes the asymmetry from the rest of the game, but her asymmetry is pointedly unbalanced. Shilonen has dangly clothes as well as multiple layers, but she looks like a DJ wearing denim short shorts instead of the renowned smith she's supposed to be. Ressa has detached sleeves and some tassels hanging from her belt, but nothing about her aesthetic fits Tevat. Kinich, Iansan, Aoife, they all feel like they strayed a little too far away. The only one who, to my taste, really looks and feels like a Genshin character is Citlali, and even she has her weird pillows and some out-there animations. And of course, our rebel biker chick Marika, the worst offender, and I'm particularly sad when comparing what we got in-game to the multiple fantastic outfits she had in several trailers, each of which fulfilled all the common themes which had been so wonderfully consistent up until this point. And again, let me emphasize, this is not a value judgment. I love Auroron, for example, both in terms of character and design, but he does not look like a kind-hearted farm boy who pours his love and attention into his vegetable garden, and he does not feel like he comes from Tevat at all. I'm even one of the 3 Chaska design enjoyers in the entire world. It's not wrong to love these characters, it's not wrong to like their designs, and it's also not wrong to notice that they just don't fit with anything that came before. Many of us fell in love with Genshin in part because of that magical mix of high fantasy, steampunk, and varied real-world cultural aesthetics, and for years they just kept on putting out fantastic new designs. Sometimes people found that the unique aesthetics of one region didn't quite work for them, but often that just meant that those who came straight after ended up being even more appealing than the ones which came before. Fontaine in particular was my kryptonite, and I just adored every single character from that region. So when Natlan came along and broke away from those design styles and aesthetics which we all had loved so much, it's natural that many felt that the game was no longer built for us. After all, a major part of what we love was visibly being thrown away. It will have been a factor in why many people gave up the game entirely, and it is a major reason I personally stopped spending money to collect every character. Though more on that once it's time for me to write my Natlan retrospective. My only hope was that Natlan would be an aberration, and that Darway's tearful speech and commitment to return to Genshin's roots meant that the stuff they were working on for future regions was going to be a return to form, and Natlan was just a casualty of the time they spent going in the wrong direction. And so, Nod Krai. After Hoyo's unexpected developer discussion stream, where they acknowledged the failures of their storytelling, I was curious what direction they would take. The faction descriptions on the website for the Song of the Welkin Moon sounded promising, but I remained skeptical. The music was ethereal, and the landscapes they showed looked like they would fit the wider themes, but then again, Natlan's music is fantastic and the landscapes there are gorgeous too. In the 5.8 livestream, we got to see 3 of the upcoming characters. Ineffa was the main event, and while many felt she too was a little out of place, to me she is a perfect example of Genshin's steampunk vibes, and more than anything, she reminds me of the robots from Fontaine, turned into a playable character. While her layered cape does echo some of the design language which has been neglected in Natlan, a playable robot is always going to be an outlier, and I felt that we couldn't really judge the direction based off her alone. We caught a brief glimpse of Aina, Ineffa's creator, and she kinda feels similar too. While she does have that Genshin vibe to some extent, she's definitely at the outside edge of what would fit the themes. And again, this felt inconclusive. She was obviously from the Clink Clank Crumb Cake craft shop, so it made sense that she would be an extreme end of the spectrum even if they were returning to their roots. But then, at the end of the livestream, they dropped the trailer for Lauma. She is at the fantasy end of the spectrum, and her design screams Genshin. Layers of flowing fabric, intricate ornamentation, pastel colors. She's absolutely gorgeous and feels like exactly what I've been missing throughout Natlan. And then they dropped the character teaser trailer, which revealed 7 new character designs, and it really feels like a return to form. As promised, there are many different factions, so as a group, they feel as incohesive as the Natlan cast, but this time, each of them has a different take on those classic design tropes which were so consistent before Natlan, either marking them as traveler from one of those earlier nations, or at least making them feel like they belong. Jehoda stands out as a little on the modern side, but she fits well with Ineffa and Aina. Durin looks like a new take on the styles of Mondstadt's Church of Favonius. Flynn's is just perfection, dark and brooding, with flowing multi-layered cape and intricate silver work. Neffa is a distillation of the Sumeru deserts aesthetic. Nicole looks simply gorgeous. Varka is almost exactly how I had imagined him. And then we have Alice. After loving her more traditional witchy outfit teased in a previous trailer, unfortunately, her actual design is the biggest disappointment for me. She does have a lot of the classic Genshin trope, so she very much fits in the world, but she's just not what I had hoped for. She's a collection of all the Genshin design tropes that I don't like crammed into one design, with the mere concept of a hat on her head to top it off. Perhaps her witch outfit to match with Klee's will be a skin for later on. In terms of theme, every last one of them feels like they belong in a fantasy steampunk world. And in terms of visuals, they have the overlayered clothes, the strips of dangling fabric, the detached sleeves, capes, embellishments, and trinkets hanging everywhere. The color schemes look right, the voice acting is great, and something about the way they act makes me suspect they'll dial back the cartoonish animations. Throw in Sandrone and Columbina, and it's clear why we are all so excited. And finally, a couple of days ago, they released Ineffa's trailer. I have not watched it. Her and Aina are 2 of the characters I was least interested in out of the Nod Krai cast, based on designs alone, and I need to save my Prima Gems, so I have to keep my distance and wait for a rerun. From what I've heard, the trailer is fantastic, and the pair of them are just heartbreakingly adorable, and even though it's just a couple of minutes long, it has at least come close to convincing people who were skeptical to pull for them already. I love robots, but I can't afford for them to suck me in, so this one will have to wait. It's still very early days for Nod Krai, but once again, I can't help but compare to how I felt this time last year. After Fontaine, I was so ready for the next region, but even though I loved dinosaurs and thought the Saurians looked great, something about the early Natlan trailers left me unexcited. Nod Krai is just as varied, just as eclectic, and yet there are already so many characters who feel so fitting in the world, and even the more out there designs feel just about within the bounds of verisimilitude. Obviously, we cannot judge until we've encountered them in-game, and so much of their success will depend on whether Hoyo have managed to fix their storytelling problems, and also how successful any fresh new gameplay feels. But for the first time in a long while, it feels like they're moving in the right direction. I can't wait to see more. Until next time.